Welcome to Talking Decon. Today we are going to be discussing Robert Berdella and Steve Miller here, our senior digital strategist, has totally researched this case, and I have personal connection to this that we'll get into a little bit later, but this particular case is pretty fascinating.
Yes, I'm super excited to talk about Robert Berdella. Berdella was born on January 31st, 1949, but by the time that he died on October 8th, 1992, he had murdered and tortured 6 men and became known as the Butcher of Kansas City and the Collector. So the sources for this are from Better Off Red on YouTube, Murderpedia, and Wikipedia.
Damn, you did your intro a lot better than mine.
Thank you, Kennedy. This is the positive reinforcement we have here at Talking Decon. Like I read a paragraph and Kenny's like, good job. Like, thank you.
Kenny's like, I thought I had to memorize it. Sorry.
So Robert was an intelligent loner that preferred to spend his time indoors and didn't have many friends. His younger brother Daniel was athletic and had a natural aptitude for sports. And this, of course, infuriated his dad, who was one of those dads that we all sort of, or at least I sort of saw growing up, like in baseball and stuff, that was like way too into sports in their kid's life. So Robert became a great disappointment to him because he wasn't athletic, you know, and his other son, you know, became the shining example of masculinity and what a person should be. So what does a good parent do in this situation? You pit them against each other.
Exactly.
That's the way you raise healthy kids.
You want to turn your kid into the next serial killer.
Right. So he would constantly praise Daniel and then tear Robert down.
Right.
And in addition to the psychological abuse, their father would also occasionally beat them with a leather strap. Parenting in the 50s was pretty cool.
Yeah, it was awesome. Totally remember it.
Yeah, that's that moment where it's like, we need to go back to the good old days.
Yes.
And I'm like, are these the good old days
Yeah.
where children were beaten with straps?
Yeah,
Oh,
we got to pick our belt.
Yes. Oh,
Yes.
see,
We had some decision in it.
Yeah, I definitely got the belt. I'm like the tail end of that generation.
Oh, yeah.
So my dad's raised squarely, like, you know, he's the child of the Depression. So for us, you know, but it was an appointment. Like my mother would decide if we got the belt. And then when your father comes home to get the belt.
Wow.
So then you spend the day just being like,
you got to sit and think about it.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It's the worst.
We got the wooden spoon from my mom, though. Did you get that?
Yes.
On the hands.
Yeah, I got
wooden
anything.
spoon.
Anything my mom could grab.
Yep.
We got. You know. But if the violation was high enough, and we take it to the next authority, we're taking it to dad. He's pulling out the belt.
Yep, the belt.
The funny thing is, I got beat with the belt too, so it didn't
really?
end there.
It didn't end.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
And then my mom, spoons and stuff, our problem is we were runners. Our fight or flight kicked in, and ours was flight, and we'd start running.
Oh, she'd throw them.
Oh, and it hit you square in the back of the head every time.
Yeah, mothers have amazing aim.
They do.
Yeah.
We sat there and took it like a G. That's what we did.
No, we screamed,
What else,
cried,
Dad?
and ran.
Corporal punishment.
Yes. So in addition to having a super sweet home life, Robert was also bullied at school because he had a speech impediment and he wore these extremely thick Coke bottle glasses.
Wow.
Yeah.
Poor
Look, I guess it's
Robert.
okay to feel bad for him at this moment, but pretty quickly.
Yeah.
I want you to, this moment of, oh, what a sweet, sweet boy.
Yeah.
I want you to hang on to that when he's putting hypodermic needles into people's backs.
Exactly.
Oh, God.
And shocking their testicles.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Why not? So when Robert was 16, his father died of a heart attack. His mother remarried, and Robert was not happy about it, which sort of blows my mind, right? Because he felt like it was a betrayal, and he was super upset with his mom. And I think that speaks to, you know, abuse victims in general, right? Where it's like, sure, dad was a shithead that beat me and made me feel terrible about myself, but he was still my dad, and I think that he was probably the coolest. So, Mom, I'm angry at you for remarrying.
Yeah.
Oof.
So he graduated high school in '67. He moved to Kansas City.
Yeah.
There dies the connection. And he attended the Kansas City Art Institute. During this time, he was arrested on drug charges, once for trying to sell amphetamines to an undercover police officer, and then a month later for possession of weed and LSD. In addition to the drug charges, he was also involved in at least 3 acts of animal cruelty. So he tortured a duck and a chicken, and he also would give tranquilizers to dogs.
I'm taking that all back.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. See, pretty quickly.
Yeah, so quick.
Yeah, we're 3 sentences past in having thick glasses, and now we're immediately into torturing animals. So I guess,
he got booted out of the Art Institute, which is still a very big and prominent school in Kansas City.
Oh, that's
yeah,
cool.
yeah,
That's
very
cool.
popular.
Yeah, and so what he got kicked out for was super interesting, but I guess he was giving these tranquilizers to dogs on multiple occasions as well, like experimenting with how much does it take to knock somebody out, which really comes into play.
Right.
Yeah, as he really gets up to speed. So he withdrew from art school in 1969 after he received harsh criticism from the faculty and from professors for one of his art exhibits, which was he killed, cooked, and ate a duck. And that was the art.
Like performance art?
Yes. Yeah. So that is like that weird, bizarre line. Like, I'm definitely an arty person. I don't mind performance art and that stuff, but I think at a certain point, it's like, what we're just doing now is sort of cruel.
Yeah, but for him to do that, something in him thought that was okay.
Sure.
Because he did it on a broad level.
That's true. Displayed it and everything. Yeah.
Right.
There was no shame. Look at what I'm going to do.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly.
And I would bet that if I talked to this guy then, like when he did it, and this is me putting things into people's minds, but so we know he likes acid and weed and speed. You know, he's in the 60s.
Right.
He's in an art school. He's probably like, oh, this is a commentary on the consumerism. Like, you won't watch me kill this thing, but you'll go home and eat it. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if it was that. But based on the fact that he was also torturing animals, it feels like he just wanted to torture something in front of people.
Wow.
You know? So after leaving school, he worked as a cook, which makes sense.
Shocking.
Animals.
Yes.
There seems to be a theme.
Yeah,
like
for
cooks
sure.
and serial killers.
Well, now you're really trying to find something there. As somebody that worked in hospitality for some time and worked on the line, I'm offended.
I mean,
it's not like I have male pattern baldness, which
Exactly.
Laura needs to get into.
Exactly.
Because Laura has the theory about what ties all of these serial killers together.
I do. Wait for it. Wait
Kennedy
for it.
saw her dead grandpa, so...
Well, this is true.
Yeah.
I guess maybe we're all serial
Did he have the
killers.
Ronald McDonald do?
Yeah.
No, he actually, my grandpa is like from up north, like Maryland Mountains, so he had like a mullet.
Oh.
Yeah.
I like that that's a requirement for being from the Maryland Mountains. So he had a mullet because
he had a mullet.
I mean, he was...
Achy breaky big mistakey.
That was my grandpa.
The old Kentucky waterfalls.
Yeah,
sure.
exactly.
So he worked as a cook for a while. He's actually really involved with that, and he was sort of a big part of that community.
Mm-hmm.
He launched a training program at community college to help teach young cooks how to get going. And on the side, from the time he was younger, like he dealt with antiquities and oddities. So he had pen pals sort of all over the world. Like he'd write to people in Vietnam and Cambodia and other places, and they would start trading things like stamps and coins, and then weirder and weirder stuff. So he got into that weird, like, esoteric and antiquity type things, and eventually he opened a store called Bob's Bazaar, which is a pretty great name. I'm not gonna lie.
It is actually pretty great. Yeah, the play on the words there.
Yeah, and to be clear, like, yes, he opened a store, and yes, it was named, but it was also just a booth at a flea market. So it wasn't like he opened some amazing store. And then, but to offset, because slowly that business took over more and more of his time, so then he stopped cooking. But to offset the cost of living, he started renting his house out to boarders, which becomes super important to the story because it became
like temporary roommates, right?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah,
okay.
Like renting a room. So that became his hunting ground. Was people that he knew through, a lot of that through that. So it's believed that he killed his first victim on July 5th, 1984. And what's sort of wild about this is that his first victim was a 19-year-old named Jerry Howell, and the Howells were family friends of Berdella, right? So Howell, the father, had the booth next to him at a flea market. And then, his business sort of took off over time, and they moved to an actual store. But he stayed in touch with the family, so much so that, like, when Jerry Howell, the son, would get in trouble, he would come to Bob for money. So he would pay him, give him money, bail him out of jail, things like that. Mm-hmm. So they were friends, and knew him for a long time. Jerry Howell got out of jail and was going to go to a dance outside of town. So he reached out to Bob for a ride. So Bob agreed, yeah, of course, I'm going to take you. I'll take you. And then instead, he got him drunk, and he also sedated him with pills. And then eventually he injected him with a sedative and then abducted him. And Robert came to and woke up tied to Jerry's bed.
Oh my gosh.
He kept.
You mean Jerry woke up
Sorry.
tied to Robert's bed?
Correct. Yeah. So I keep I'm going to do my best to stick with Bob, even though I keep writing Robert, because there's a victim named Robert down the line. So it becomes, Jerry wakes up tied to Bob's bed, restrained to his bed.
Probably going, what the fuck just happened?
Yes. Yeah. I'm supposed to be at a dance.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
He kept Jerry restrained for 28 hours. And during this time frame, he repeatedly drugged, tortured, and raped him, and used foreign objects, inserting foreign objects into him. Eventually, Jerry died from either choking on his own vomit or succumbing to the drugs. They're not sure exactly. Robert dragged Jerry's body to the basement, hoisted the body above a big pot, and made several incisions, including the jugular, and
Jesus, kind of like a deer. They just drained
exactly
the blood out of it.
Yeah, he drained the body of all the blood, and he did this overnight. Then he went to bed, woke up, got a big day tomorrow.
Oh, big
Got to
day.
dismember the body.
Big day. We got to
So,
cut her up.
Yeah, he went down to the basement with a chainsaw and knife and dismembered him. Took him apart, wrapped him up in newspaper, put it inside a trash bag, put that trash bag inside a bigger trash bag with other trash, and did this to the entire body.
Just put it out for the city
put
trash.
it out for the curb to pick up.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and they came. Yeah.
Oh, I was gonna say I have a question when that happens.
Yeah.
So like if you toss it out with like the city trash and it goes to the dumpster, like do they look through that stuff?
No.
So like it could just be in a fill and no one would ever find it.
Yep.
Most of
about-
these bodies were never found, and they're presumed to be in the landfill.
Wow. And what about so like let's say you're throwing it on the side of the road. Like, do people look at those?
I would
Depends on the
imagine
person,
if
right?
there's a bag on the
You
side
stumble
of the road,
across
you would look
it?
at Yeah, I would.
I have stopped on a trip to Key West, and there was a bag on the side of the road, and it was moving.
Oh.
And I stopped and went back, and I opened it up, and it was puppies. Yeah. So
that was like perfectly timed, by the way.
yeah, yeah. So I'm still waiting for the day where it's a bag of money, but that hasn't happened yet. So anyway, I took the puppies and I went over to the shelter and dropped them off. But somebody tossed them.
Just bring them to the shelter.
I know.
Some people are sick, man. Like,
$6.
You don't have to do that. You
Yeah.
can take them to there is literally a resource where you will not be judged and nobody will care. Here
No.
are puppies.
But what I'm wondering is, he felt pretty comfortable, and rightly so,
Sure.
with disposing of these bodies just as normal trash because he cut them up into small enough pieces. But one of our other episodes, The Kind Killer, he felt the need to put them under his floorboards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do British people not pick up trash? Is my
the British
question.
just live amongst
The
the
British
filth.
trash, they don't have trash.
Well, I think the difference is, right, like for Dennis Nielsen,
Yeah.
the kindly killer, for him, he wanted to spend time with the body.
Oh,
he wanted
yeah.
to hang
Yeah,
out
that's
with the
true.
body.
That's true.
And you have to get rid of them quick.
Yeah.
Yep.
Bob Berdella wants them alive
Yeah,
for
he's-
as long as he can to torture them.
He's a sexual sadist.
Right, a sexual sadist,
Yeah.
exactly. Wow.
So Bob's next victim was 23-year-old Robert Sheldon. And this is sort of where it started with that Robert used to be a boarder at his house.
Mm-hmm.
And he shows up and says, look, I need a place to stay for a little bit of time. Had, rough times again, whatever. He said, yeah, you can stay with me. And apparently Bob saw him as an inconvenience. Like, he didn't really dislike him. He didn't really hate him. He was sort of ambivalent to him. And what he said was he decided to use him to, quote, express some of the anger and frustration that I had towards other people on. So like he had this anger inside of him, didn't have feelings for Robert one way or another, decided this is going to be the guy that taken out on.
Oh
So
my
he
God.
drugged Sheldon, Robert, and held him captive in the second floor bedroom for 3 days.
Mm-mm.
During this time, Bob subjected him to a series of heinous rapes and tortures, including the swabbing of drain cleaner in his eye.
Oh my God. Can you imagine how
Ugh.
f***ing painful
I mean,
that is?
That is just to be a dick.
Drain cleaner
Yeah.
in your eye.
The insertion of needles beneath his fingertips.
Ah!
The binding of wrists with piano wire with the
Oh my
intention of
God.
permanently damaging the nerves of his hands.
What the?
And then he filled his ears with caulk to reduce his hearing
Oh
capacity.
my God.
Yeah. I mean,
This
3
guy was
days.
sick, man.
3 days of this. And so after the third day, Bob had somebody scheduled to come to the house to work on the house, so he killed him and then dissected the body
Oh
and
my
disposed of it
God.
the same way.
Same way. Drain it,
Yeah.
put the blood down the drain, and
Yep.
chop up the
And then
body, and
send it out to the curb.
city trash, baby.
Yeah. And it is, and we'll talk about this because as we get into your connections, I want to talk about it because they did find some skulls at his house, but they didn't find all of them.
Exactly.
So there is some theories that we're going to talk about
Yeah.
as to what he did with the rest of these skulls.
Yeah.
So the next victim was a guy named Mark Wallace, and Mark used to work or had done some work for Bob
Mhm.
around the house, like yard work and stuff. And Bob found Mark in his shed. It was like a nasty rainstorm, and Mark was in the area, so Mark ducked in there real quick, And it's just one of those weird things where it's like, if it hadn't rained that day,
Mm.
So Bob sees him, invites him in the house. Come in, come in the house. Oh, you seem nervous. You seem upset. Let me give you a quick injection here of this sedative. It'll help calm you down. So you also see sort of the people that we're dealing with too. Not that
Right.
it makes it any less, but
Right.
like for me, if
They're
somebody that
receptive to injections of drugs
yeah,
and
of
all
course,
that. Yeah.
So he does it, injects him, knocks him out, restrains him, brings him to the second floor bedroom where he tortured him, and amongst other, some of the other things he did previously, he added in applying alligator clamps to the nipples and then running electricity through those clamps. He also experimented with inserting hypodermic needles into various muscles in his back.
Ah.
And about an hour into these, quote, experiments, Mark died from a combination of either the drugs, this is according to him,
Yeah.
the drugs, the gag, and the lack of oxygen.
Oh my gosh.
You know. By the way, this was the guy that you guys were really upset about earlier.
Yo, I took it back.
So-
I backtracked.
Remember
Kennedy
those Coke
backtracked.
bottle glasses? Quit feeling
Yeah,
sorry
yes,
for him, baby.
yes.
That's the least of his worries.
Wow.
His next victim was James Ferris, who was an acquaintance. He called him and asked if he could stay with Bob for a little bit. Again, had stayed with him before, was a boarder, needed a place to stay. Bob gave him drugs, same MO, and kept him alive for 27 hours. The torture included repeated administration of 7,700 electrical shocks to the shoulder and testicles for up to 5 minutes in each instance. Acupuncture via hypodermic needles to the neck and genitals. And then he eventually became delirious, but Berdella continued with the physical and sexual assaults until he noted in his log that Ferris was unable to sit up for more than 10 or 15 seconds. Now, this is a thing. When the police arrested him and found him, he kept detailed notes of everything.
Yeah.
You know, so it was like he really...
Don't most good serial killers?
Yeah, true.
They want to reflect on it, and
Yeah.
jack off to
Exactly.
it, you know?
Oh,
Yeah.
so-
Oh,
remember
I'm
that-
so
yeah.
smart.
Remember that time when I shocked his balls?
Yeah.
I've never felt more alive in my life.
I put caulk in his ear.
Oh my god.
Then in June of '86, Bob ran into Todd Stoops in a park. Todd had boarded at Bob's house again on several separate occasions. Stoops was a sex worker, stated that he needed some money, make some quick money, so Bob invited him back to the house for lunch and to make a few bucks. Of course, in that lunch, he drugged the lunch. He kept him for 2 weeks before he finally
Whoa,
succumbed.
he must have liked this one.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
He did. During those 2 weeks, Berdella gradually increased his captive's terror to make him more cooperative and incapacitated sex slave.
Oh my
So
god.
he kept ramping things up, and the theory being to make him more pliant and to do whatever he wanted to. He used electrical shocks through Stoops' closed eyes and attempt to blind him. He injected drain cleaner into his larynx to try to stop him from screaming.
Oh.
So that way nobody would hear him.
Yo, this guy is sick, man.
Sick man.
Eventually,
Crazy.
Who thinks of this stuff?
sweet
Serial
people-
killers.
Yeah,
But I mean,
yeah.
yeah, that's true.
It's
That's
the
good. I
Coke
don't
bottle
think about
glasses.
it.
Yeah. People was short-sighted.
Yeah.
Eventually, he ruptured Stoops' anal wall with his fist, causing massive bleeding. So towards the end of Stoops' captivity, he tried to feed him, but he couldn't keep anything down.
Shocking.
Yeah, exactly. On July 1st, Stoops died. A forensic pathologist testified that it was from the ruptured anal wall
Oh my
that caused a
gosh.
septic shock that proved fatal.
A fist up your anus will
so
do
he's
it.
fisting him, and I don't want to get whatever. Okay, it's a family show.
Steve was too good at that.
Okay, so Berdella's next victim was Larry Wayne Pearson. Pearson, again, had been a lodger, stayed with him, and he reached out to Berdella to actually bail him out of jail. So he bailed him out of jail, brought him home. Oh, thanks, what a great guy. Of course, immediately drugs him, injects him, and shackles his hands together and attaches him to a brick column. And according to Berdella, Pearson was by far the most cooperative of his 6 murder victims, which, by the way, is like a really weird thing to say. It's like, I mean, dude, like he's not cooperative in any way. He's chained to a column.
Yeah.
But I guess it's everything's relative.
Yeah.
On the 5th day of his captivity, having by this stage endured torture such as repeated administration of electrical shocks, the breaking of several hand bones with an iron rod, Berdella decided that Pearson had earned his trust. Yeah. So as a form of reward, Pearson was moved to the 2nd floor, moving on up, right? From the basement up to the 2nd floor. Come on.
Nice.
He told Pearson that if he continued to cooperate, he would not continue to inflict as much pain upon him. And so this was like this carrot to keep him going. After 6 weeks of
Oh my God.
captivity.
This is the longest one, right?
Yeah, 6 weeks.
Jesus.
Pearson bit deeply into Berdella's penis before screaming he could not continue to tolerate being treated in this manner. So it's an act of forced fellatio. He's forcing his penis into Pearson's mouth. I assume he must have trusted him at a certain point, and he bit down. In response, Berdella immediately kills him.
Oh my.
Now, what's interesting, I believe that this is from this particular notation from Wikipedia, where he says, he drove to the hospital to receive treatment for his wounds. And I've looked around online, and I wasn't able to find what reason or what excuse he gave. And I think, like Laura, we talked about it a little bit, where it could just be one of those, in that
Rough
time
sex,
frame, you're just a gay guy having rough sex. Like somebody got a little crazy with me, you know?
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's what it was or not, but I would love to know the story that he.
Well, it's got to
you
be
know.
pretty severe for him to go to the hospital to begin with.
Yeah,
He
right.
He had to have done some damage.
I mean, so you're held captive for 6 weeks.
yeah,
This is your one chance. You
chance.
have to know this is your one chance.
yeah,
And there's no way, like it had to have been quite a substantial bite.
right, but
You
not
know.
enough to disable him,
Yeah. I
unless
guess
he
not,
was
you know.
bound while he was doing it.
I would imagine he was still
Maybe he was
bound.
just weak from the torture, you know?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, drugged and
Yeah.
all that. Yeah,
Yeah.
It seems like he was bound though, because I said a tree limb. They weren't outside or anything.
He was
Did
bludgeoned
just
with a
have-
tree limb, right?
Yeah, tree
Yeah.
limbs floating around in this house.
Yeah, I mean, he had skulls, so.
Ugh.
So later he dismembered him in the basement, and he stored his head for a while in a plastic bag in the freezer, which as one does, before burying him in the backyard.
Of
You
course.
know.
Preserve it, right?
Yes. And the
Yes.
final victim was a 22-year-old sex worker, Christopher Bryson. Brought him back to the house.
Low-hanging
on the promise
fruit
of
again.
Sex. That's
Yep.
it. Nobody will go after. Nobody will care if they're reported missing. You know, this one's a little different. Instead of giving him drugs, whacked him over the head with an iron bar and proceeded to beat him and torture him in much the same way as his other victims.
Right.
After several days, Berdella explained to Bryson that he began to trust his captive, and he was willing to discuss aspects of the abuse and torture that he was receiving. So there would be negotiations pertaining to the sexual abuse. So they're like going back and forth a little bit. What's interesting is that as you read through this and as you think about this, the one before this as well, I trust you more. I'm going to bring you upstairs. Like
Yeah.
I wonder, and initially it was killing him, torturing him, moving on. But
Right.
it seems like maybe over time did he want to be in some sort of weird relationship? I
Yeah.
don't know, because he's starting to discuss
Right.
what's happening with these people, you know. By the third day of capture, Bryson had earned sufficient trust to persuade him to establish, the daily regime of tying his hands in front of him rather than above his head or
Right.
tying him to the bed, So it's like making these little tiny adjustments, trying to figure out, how he's going to get out.
Right.
He also had him agree to leave the television on in the room so he had something to watch, all these little things, He told investigators later that he thought constantly about escaping, which makes
Yeah,
perfect sense.
totally.
I'm sure every other guy in this scenario
Oh,
did as
yeah.
well. I'm sure there's nobody who's like, this is a pretty
Obsessed
sweet
with
deal.
it. Yeah.
I don't got to pay rent.
Exactly.
The following day, he managed to break free of his restraints by burning through them using a book of matches that Berdella had left.
Wow.
So it
Nice.
became this. I mean, that's such a smart idea. And like when I first read that, I'm like, put the flame near your hands. It's like,
Yeah.
Steve, you're being tortured by a sexual sadist. Like, if you got to burn your hands a little bit, this is
Yeah.
how soft I am, though.
Yeah.
Bryson managed to escape the house, and he jumped out of a second-floor window,
Oh my god.
wearing nothing besides a dog collar around his neck.
Oh my
Broke
Broke a
goodness.
bone in his foot in the process. He ran up to a meter reader who was across the other side of the street, shouted for them to call the police. The police showed up, minutes later. There is some interesting things that I know Laura wants to talk
Yeah.
about this, but at the end of it, he pleaded guilty to all charges and pled to everything so he wouldn't get the death penalty. And he was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. And in 1992,
Unfortunately, he
Yeah.
died before he
Yeah.
could ever serve.
4 years later,
Yeah, that's
he dies of a
bullshit.
heart attack, which is complete
Shit.
You
No justice
Yeah.
for those victims.
Yes, yeah. And I guess he complained that the staff hadn't been properly giving him his heart medicine, blah, blah, blah.
Oh, yeah.
Who gives
Yeah.
a fuck?
Who gives a f?
I care less.
Yeah. Exactly.
So that is the butcher of Kansas City, Robert Berdella, just a brutal sexual sadist.
Yeah.
And I can't wait to hear
Yeah,
Laura's
so-
sides, because she worked in the department that
Yeah.
dealt with this guy.
So I started the department in 1998. So this was still kind of very well talked about. And what you don't see in the news and the media and stuff is that it was presumed that Bob Berdella was selling the skulls in his bizarre flea market, and people have them not knowing that they were actual victims. So there was like a kind of a media type release of, hey, if you visited this store and you bought a human skull thinking it was like scientific type stuff, might be a real human being. So
It could be a murder victim.
it could be
yeah.
a murder
Holy
victim.
crap.
So these are the ones that he admitted to. We don't know if there are more. But another thing was, when the guy escaped, they initially brushed him off as just kind of gay guys just having rough sex. And it was pretty controversial because he had to beg, plead, and cry because he essentially walked into the police station with nothing but a dog collar on. So they're looking at him like, what the f*** is going on here? And, again, this was a long time ago. This was in the late 80s. So they really just kind of like brushed him off, and he had to really make his point for them to take it seriously.
Wow.
And it opened up a can of worms.
It's the same thing we see with Dahmer,
Yep.
right? Where that young,
Same thing.
the young Asian man.
Yep.
They sent him back
Yeah,
to Dahmer.
back
They
to
brought him back.
And he
and
died.
said, yeah. And by the way, I know that the 80s were a long time ago, but
Yeah.
as somebody that's 45 years old,
Yeah.
I don't like hearing that the 80s were a long time
Well,
ago.
I'm right there with you.
Yeah, but for sure it was. But I think this is the reality that gay people lived in that
Yeah.
time, even up till recently. This is what sort of drives me crazy when people are like, why do you gotta have a pride festival? Oh, because it wasn't that long ago where
Yeah.
if you were saying I've been abused, and they're like, get
They're
out
like,
of here, gay guy.
yeah, you're
I
gay.
don't see big deal. There's
Yeah.
a couple of gay guys beating each other up. Okay.
Yeah. But I've got to bring up something. My theory. No one else is here. Okay? Take a photo of Bob Berdella, BTK, and Ariel Castro, 3 serial killers, and what do you see that they have in common? Okay? Dark hair, Ronald McDonald haircut, or as Steve calls it, early pattern baldness. I don't know how early it is on some of them, though. But, I mean, they look unbelievably similar. And they're all serial killers. So, my theory, not science. I don't know. Do you guys see it?
They look very similar.
Very, very similar.
Very similar. So there's that serial killer triad, right? So
Yes.
it's like there's these signs, right? So it's like torturing an animal,
Right.
wetting your bed. I don't recall.
Lack
what
of
those are.
empathy.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So and then Laura's adding the fourth to it, which is male pattern baldness,
Yes.
Yeah.
which I
Yep.
can see. I can see it. It's there. It
Yes.
exists.
Yes. They're all three.
But I just want it for the record.
Yes. Yes.
Steve
He
is
has-
Full head of
definitely
hair.
not a
Luscious.
Full
serial
head of hair.
killer.
Yes.
Luscious locks, man.
So, if you're watching this, you might want to pay attention to the next Rogaine commercial. It might be the next serial killer. Just saying.
Look over at your husband or your boyfriend.
Yes.
Check the hair.
Yes.
Check the genealogy as well. Like,
Right.
if your husband's father was bald, is that what it is? It's maternal gene?
It's the maternal
Yeah.
father. Yes.
Take a
Grandfather.
look. See what's going on.
Hold
Yes.
up. Wait, say that one more time.
It's your mom's father.
Yeah.
So if your mom's father is bald, most likely your son's will be.
Okay, sons.
That's what they say. Again, not scientific. But I think that the resemblance is uncanny in the three of them.
Yeah.
They all have the same facial hair. They all have the same haircut, the same hair color, the same tendencies of torture.
Yep.
Um,
And I don't know, man. I always struggle with this. I don't know if I see like evil in their eyes because I know who they were prior to it.
Mm.
But when you look at all their eyes, there's like,
Just
there's
dead.
that line from Jaws where he talks about the shark's
Yeah.
eyes. Dead eyes, lifeless eyes,
Yeah.
like a doll's
Yeah.
eyes. It's the same.
it's like
That's how I
lack of
feel when you look at
humanity.
them. Yeah.
It's just dead.
Yeah.
It's dead. So very, very interesting. This guy was super interesting. And I remember, everybody in the department still talking about it because his house was still there.
Yeah.
And everybody in the neighborhood kind of wanted it knocked down. And, it might be knocked down today. I don't know. But back then it was, kind of this old kind of Victorian 2-story craftsman looking thing. And in just your average neighborhood. And it was shocking. It was definitely shocking. People still, I've heard, drive by the
People are
area.
obsessed with
People
this
are
stuff.
obsessed with it.
you know?
Yeah. So he's a sick and
Yeah.
that's our sick for today on Talking Decon. So thanks for joining us, guys.